What is up, guys? In today's lesson we're going to be looking at how we can create a Pokemon Pokedex app, and it's going to be a very simple version of the real one. So we're going to have all of the 151 original Pokemon, and of course you can add the others later, but as you can see right here we have an API that's going to be loaded into our app, so we can have all of the starter Pokemons load as we scroll. And if we click on something such as a Sandslash, it'll take us to a detail view where of course you can add your own details, or you can try to make this app a bit more advanced and add your own description. If we go back, it will take us back to our main screen, and also let's pretend we want to find a certain Pokemon. We also have a search bar for that, so if we want to go ahead and look for an Articuno, for example, we just type in art, and it's going to search for Articuno. And maybe we want to go for the dragon Pokemons, I forgot what they're called. Let's say Dragonair. We can click on Dragonair, and it's simple as that. It loads them and it finds them. So that's practically the app we're going to be creating in SwiftUI. As you can see, it's fairly simple and it shouldn't really take that much time. I think we can do this in 25 minutes. So let's get started immediately by opening Xcode and creating a new project. So here we'll hold down Shift Command plus N, and we have to click on App and Next. We're going to call this Pokedex tutorial, and we're going to select SwiftUI and Swift as the language. Then we just have to select a project location and click on Create. Now for this entire project we're going to be using the Pokemon API, and this is a free API provided by PokeyApi.co, so I will leave a link to this in the description down below in case you are curious. This is where I'm going to get the Pokemon from. It's 100% free and works great. And also I want to mention before we start on this project that you can find all of the project files in the description down below. You'll see a section called source code, and you can just copy whatever part of this project you want. In case you don't want to follow the tutorial or you get stuck somewhere, definitely check out that GitHub repository. But with that being said, let's go ahead and close this sidebar and this sidebar over here and change the phone to an iPhone 13 just to make sure that everything's working smoothly. Great. So we have an iPhone 13 that appeared and it's working. So let's go ahead and minimize that. And actually we're going to go ahead and open up the sidebar again because we're going to have to create a few classes. But first let's go ahead and create some project structure. So go ahead and hold down Option plus Command so we can create a new group. And the first one is going to contain the views. So we can just drag content view in there, and then later if we create another view we're going to drag it into there as well. Then let's go ahead and create one more folder, and it's going to be called API, and inside here we're just going to insert our API project files, and let's drag that out of this folder because it should be a separate folder, and I'll keep views at the top. Now inside the API folder we can go ahead and create our first API file, which is going to be a Swift file, and click on Next. Then we're just going to call this Pokemon because this is going to retrieve all the Pokemon we need, and then later we will create another API class that gets the image. But the first thing to note is that we're going to be using this endpoint as the API, and of course I will leave this in the description down below so you can just copy and paste that. As you can see, it's an API request that goes for the first 151 Pokemon. If we actually go to the browser and paste it in, it's going to return to us a response of 151 Pokemon with the name and the URL. And each URL is going to take us to a detailed JSON where we can find the sprites, and that's where we're going to get the image from. So the goal we're going to try to aim for is to retrieve first the Pokemon name, and then to retrieve the Pokemon sprite so we can show the user a beautiful Pokemon image. But let's go back to the original, and what we have to note inside here is that we want to search for the results, the name and the URL. So we need to create some data classes that can satisfy those requirements. And to get started, we'll just go ahead and type in struct Pokemon, which will be type codable or conform to the codable protocol. And we're going to get the results, which is going to be an array of Pokemon entries. And we can just create that immediately under. So struct Pokemon entry is going to conform to the codable protocol, plus I want to make this identifiable because it makes things simpler when we have to loop through it later. So we're going to let the ID equal a unique ID, so UUID, and then we just want to get the other fields, which is name of type string and var URL of type string. So as you can see, this one over here are the results, which is going to cover this section right here. And since results is an array, we need to create another class or another struct that will satisfy getting these names as well. So name and URL are both inside here. And in theory, we don't really need an ID because each name is going to be unique because there are no two Pokemons that are the same. But just for the sake of doing it, I'm going to include it. Up next, we're going to go ahead and create a class called Pokey Api, and it's going to only have one function, which is called getData. And inside, we're going to provide a completion listener at escaping, and inside there, we want it to return an array of Pokemon entry. Just like that. So that's just going to tell the program that when the data is complete, do not prematurely end the function, just send it back to us, in other words. Then we need to go ahead and do what we always do and create a guard let URL. So if there is a URL and it's not nil, we're going to say we want to load this string, which is going to be this API request right here. So copy and paste that and insert it inside there. So that's going to be the result for the URL if it's not nil. Else, if it is nil, we're going to have to go ahead and return out of this block. And let's close the sidebar for some added space. And I'm getting an error here because we need to remove this parentheses and surround it around the Pokemon entry. Then the program will be happier and we can actually move on. So under the guard, we want to go ahead and type in url.session.shared.dataTask. And we want to provide a data task with the URL that we've tried to retrieve, which at this point should not be nil. And this is going to open up a block. And inside here, we want to specify the data. And the other two return types do not matter, so we can just make them underscores. Otherwise, you would end up with response and error here. But if we don't use them, it doesn't really matter. So we can just do it for the convention and move on. And here we'll type in guard let data equal data. So if there's data, assign it to the data. Else, if there's nothing, then we shouldn't really do anything because there's nothing to do and we will return out of this statement. Below that, we're going to go ahead and create something called a Pokemon list because that's what we're going to return. And we're going to try to use a JSON decoder and decode the Pokemon.self class or struct from the data that we've retrieved. And if that works, we can go ahead and type in dispatch queue.main.async so we can actually update on the main thread. And we will update the completion listener and we will return the Pokemon list.results. And we need to go ahead and add a parenthesis here, or the program will throw an error. And definitely do not forget to call .resume at the bottom, so that we can actually make the task work. So that is the first request we made, and we actually want to go ahead and test that it actually works. So we're going to go and open our content view and see what it does when we call onAppear. So onAppear, and inside here, we want to insert the code that's going to print these values to us. So inside here, we can go ahead and type in Pokey Api.getData, and we don't care about this part here. We just want to get the Pokemon in the list of the data. And we're going to print the Pokemon. And it's actually a list at the moment, so we can also iterate through it. We can say for Pokemon in Pokemon, we will print the Pokemon.url, the name or the ID. To keep it simple, we'll just go ahead and print the name. But now, of course, we need to run the program to actually call the onAppear. So it's going to load hello world, but if we go back to our console, we're going to have a lot of Pokemon names loaded to our console, as you can see. And the previous log is just going to be an array of both the ID, the URL, and the name. As you can see, each Pokemon has a unique ID, but again, it doesn't really matter if everything's unique anyway. I just did it for the sake of the tutorial in case you want to work with an API that does not have an ID. It's always good to know how to use the identifiable protocol. But we have the first API working correctly, which means now we just need to work on the second API. So as you can see, inside this API, we get some links. So each Pokemon has a specific link, and each link is going to link to the image URL that we need to retrieve to get the sprite displaying on the list. So let's go ahead and work on that. So inside the API folder, we're going to go ahead and create a new file, and it's going to be called Pokemon Selected, because this will be the Pokemon that we selected through the API request, and we'll click on create. Now in general, it's always a bad idea to try to duplicate code, but to keep this tutorial simple, we're going to do pretty much the same thing that we did in the Pokemon class. Otherwise, next time we're going to try to use something called generics, which is going to allow us to make more or less the same request using the same function, even if we have different data types. But for the purpose of a beginner tutorial, we definitely are going to just do it one more time. So if we go back to the API and we click on any one of these Pokemons, we can click on this one here. You're going to see we're going to get all of these different keys, and we just want to look for the ones that say sprites, and you can even pick the weight if you want, it's up to you, but we are just interested in the sprite and the front default. So let's go back and get started with creating that. We're going to go ahead and type in struct Pokemon selected, which conforms to codable, and we want to get some sprites, so var sprites, which will be of type Pokemon sprites, which we have not created yet, so don't worry, and var weight of type int. We're not going to use the weight, but it's there, and maybe you do want to use it, so it's just good to have. Now the program, of course, is throwing an error, so we should go ahead and type in struct Pokemon sprites, which conforms to codable, and we just want to retrieve the front underscore default sprite, which is of type string. Now we're going to go back to the Pokemon class because we're going to use a lot of this that has already been written, and we're just going to add some minor adjustments. So here it says Pokey Api, and we're going to replace that with Pokemon Selected API. And the first thing we want to change is right before the completion listener, we're going to insert a URL of type string, so we can add a custom URL, and we're going to insert it inside here where it says string. And we can actually clean this a bit by adding the return over there, so it looks a bit smaller. So that is the first change we have to do. The second change is we need to go ahead and change the Pokemon list to a Pokemon sprite. And then we need to decode the Pokemon selected. And finally down here, we're going to type in Pokemon sprite.sprites, because that is the data we want to return to the UI. And of course, if you spotted this, you are great, but we also need to change the return type over here to Pokemon sprites. And that will take care of our second API request. Now, of course, let's go ahead and test it to make sure everything works correctly. So we're just going to switch real quick to the content view, and inside here, instead of the Pokey API, we're going to replace that with the Pokemon Selected API. So Pokemon Selected API, and we want to call getData, and we need to provide a string this time. So to get this string, we're going to go back to the API over here and go to the original where we have all the previous 151 Pokemon. And we're just going to pick a random URL, such as this one over here, which is the second Pokemon for Ivysaur, and we're just going to place it inside there. And then, of course, we need to type in URL in, and here we can go ahead and print the URL response. And actually, before we run this, I just ran into an error, and this is absolutely my fault. But if you go here to Pokemon sprites, it should say front default, not front defaults. But by making this quick fix, we can go ahead and run the program and see if we actually get the thumbnail we desire. So it says hello world, but if we go back, it's going to return to us an optional that says the URL link that we need to get an image from. So if we copy this and paste it in our search engine, it's going to take us to a very tiny thumbnail of Ivysaur. Now we can go back to our content view, and since we've tested both of our API requests, we can actually get started with creating the UI, which is going to display all of the Pokemons and the potential descriptions that they might have. But I'm going to leave all of that for the next video in this series. So as always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.